October 11th, it's 9:15 a.m., which means it's time to talk all things NFL football. Lots of familiar faces back in the chat for another week. Appreciate everybody stopping by, taking time out of the morning to join in. We'll break down every single game on the NFL Week 6 card. We'll talk about a couple things before we get into that as well. First order of business, Sunday morning live stream. A lot of great feedback last week. We're going to look at that and think about how we can make it work to the best for everybody. Appreciate some comments in that in the live chat as well. Lots of things to think about. Obviously, it's kind of tough when you're on a Sunday morning to get into a lot of things that could provide a lot of value. But the big thing that I've always felt was with the podcast that airs every single morning on Apple and Spotify, and then doing this on a Wednesday morning, lots going on Thursday, Friday, Saturday that sometimes doesn't get discussed. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll have updates on the potential Sunday morning live stream as we go forward. Number two, wanted to remind everybody that the prop service, if you're interested in props specifically, or you just want to join in for the sides and totals, that's available. And there's a 3-play option on the site as well. And so there's been a lot of work going into the prop side, but we also have NFL sides and totals going out every single day. So what we've done is on the website, raspicks.com, there's a $35 option that'll get you 3 sides and totals, but any props for NFL week number 6 will be included. And so if you are interested in trying out the service for NFL and you want just kind of an easy way into that, you want the official plays that come from the service, and you're looking maybe at getting props in addition to sides and totals, you can get that 3-play option. Any props included until those 3 plays are given out will be added on free. So if you want to jump over and see what the service is like, how it goes, that's something that you will probably find and get some really good value out of. Props have been really solid so far this year. We'll have a couple more definitely coming out potentially tomorrow, for sure on Sunday morning, right around 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, that will go down as official plays from the service. Also potential, I think, for about 1 or 2 more sides and totals as the week goes on, but we'll keep an eye on that. But for sure, there'll be a couple props coming out. One of the questions I got through chat on Twitter was, why are all the props coming in on overs? We've released 12 props so far this season from the service. 12 of them have been on overs. And the question was, well, why are they all overs? Isn't it better to play unders? Let's talk about that for a second. And the big answer around it is because of when they're being released, as well as this coming from a service which hundreds of people are trying to tail. If you're just a bettor by yourself and you're trying to win betting props, more times than not, you're going to benefit from betting unders. Take a guy like Ramondre Stevenson for the Patriots, running back. He's been priced kind of in the mid-50s all season long. He's been a really popular guy to bet under. And when you think about it, there's a few things at play. First of all, you can just have a really bad game from Stevenson and you can win. Second, you can have a situation where Zeke is taking away carries and Stevenson gets less carries, doesn't get the opportunities to go over. Third, there's always the chance of injury. Not something you want to root for, but when you're betting unders, that's there. And then 4 would be that the Pats are down 34 points like they were against the Saints, and he's just not going to get extra carries in that game state. The Pats are a bad team. They're playing catch up. Lots of ways that you can win unders, right? And where that kind of gets flipped on its head is when you're trying to put out to a service late in the week on Sunday morning, those unders typically get bet when they're good almost immediately. And within the prop market right now, there's 3 or 4 other competing services that release their plays very early. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. It can be difficult to follow. It can be difficult to get down. At Right Angle Sports, the object is to allow everyone to get down, which is why we tend to go later. And so a lot of these services are getting really good. They're putting out really good content. They're getting really smart at how they bet on props. And they're also going very early. So you see a lot of these really good unders just get blasted, like seconds after they're put on the board. The Joe Burrow prop a week ago for his rushing yards, that was bet 5 minutes after it was put out. It was 1 or 2 books were available. Makes it really tough, right? If you're betting on your own, that's amazing. You got that good bet. Makes a ton of sense. But when you're trying to put it out to a lot of people, typically the unders are bet right away. That's really why things have skewed to the over in terms of those releases that have gone out. The second thing I would say is just from the handicapping style, not going in all the way behind the scenes, but typically what we've been looking for as a group is players potentially undervalued within the market, looking for that breakout game. And we found spots where on a weekly basis, we're kind of identifying guys who have the potential to get a lot of opportunities, and their prices, just because they're not a dead under candidate, have provided some value for the over. And so you think about Pickens last week, one of our plays. He was a guy that ended up going way over, got a ton of snaps, a ton of opportunities, really bad offense, was just priced really low. So that's why things are kind of skewing to these overs. It's one part just because these unders are getting bet so quickly, and it's tough to give out to a lot of people that are making it widely available. And two would be that just kind of the handicapping style that we've had as a group behind the scenes have been conducive to finding these breakout games. And so that's really just a look behind the scenes overall at kind of what's going on and how that works. Jonathan asked, which group released the Burrow rush under last week? I believe it was ETR. We're seeing a lot of other competing groups go quite early on a lot of unders as well. They do terrific work. Obviously, everyone loves Silva, Levitan. I read a lot of their stuff, follow a lot of the things that they do. But it has been a lot of unders going out early week as well. There's other ones that go out too. Kyle says they won't know the groups. It's a tough thing to talk about at times. I guess there was a question earlier from the podcast, and it was right here from Preston. You reference other groups with service plays or pro bettors with plays moving lines. Where are some of those pros and groups? When you're in the space, you know pretty well who's betting those and where they're coming from. And I do reference it. Sometimes it's tough to give the specific reference. Maybe you don't agree with how it was, or it was a line that wasn't widely attainable. And I think there's always hesitance to look like it is an endorsement, but I can definitely say that me personally follow a lot of other services and groups. I know internally we do as well, but that is kind of just the runaround for why the props have been how they are. Let's get to the power ratings before we get to the upcoming week. We did this last week. Now that a lot of charts and stuff are available, just pulling this up, it gives a good indicator of where things are overall on the season. These come from Ben Baldwin, who looks at Unpredictable, puts together sort of just basic market ratings. The big noteworthy thing here from these ratings specifically, San Francisco jumped up to the top tier. If you remember last week, they were bunched down with the other 5 teams. The big win against Dallas really has them higher. The Rams jumped up again as well this week. They're pushing up in the middle class, started 28th. They're all the way up to 15th. That's the biggest increase in terms of positions. Not a lot of other big changes within this team, staying relatively consistent. But what I did want to point out as we look at these ratings is Sam Hoppen. He puts together composite ratings every single week. Kind of a weird view here as I'm put off to the side with the overlay. Nevertheless, but Sam does composite ratings. So he pulls together 6 to 7 different sources that have market ratings and prices. And so what I did this morning in my extreme experience with graphic design, as you can see, I took the week 1 ratings on the left over here, and I compared them side by side to the current week 6 ratings. And so this is pulling in 6 or 7 different sources and then looking at what these teams would be against an average team within the NFL from a point spread perspective. And so this kind of gives you an idea who's been bumped up, who's been bumped down when you're looking at pulling these sources in together. Obviously, the big one here, the biggest gainer of any team so far this season, week 1 to now, is San Francisco. Started the year 3.4 points better. They're all the way out to 9.5. In the history of tracking these ratings, I believe that this is the highest the team has ever been. There may have been a case where Kansas City top 10. I don't know specifically, but this, anytime you see 9, really, really high for a team, and kind of illustrates San Francisco and their progression so far this season. Other teams that have gone up, I took some notes on this morning. Miami is up 4 points. Detroit is up 3. The Rams, Bucks, and Texans are all up a field goal week 1 to now as well. So when we're talking about San Francisco, Miami, Detroit, LA, Tampa, and Houston, kind of aligns with what we've seen, right? All of those teams outperforming expectations. From your perspective as a bettor, mine as well, question becomes like, okay, when has this gone too far? Which of these improvements maybe not as realistic as what it should be long term? How do you sort of weight that? I think we can kind of all collectively agree now that San Francisco is kind of at the peak. It's a huge improvement week 1 to now, getting priced very high, but it's been dominant, right? They've played one of the easiest schedules so far to date in the NFL, but they're scoring margin plus 18.9 points. So it's the case of kind of the Eagles last year, easy schedule, but dominating that easy schedule. So like, when does the roof and sort of ceiling get exceeded, and when you sort to find value maybe going the other way because prices are gone too high? Maybe it's this week, pardon me. We'll talk about that game in a couple of seconds. On the other side of the spectrum, when you're looking at which teams have fell the most, we have Cincinnati and the Jets 3 points worse than where they started. Makes sense. Jets, obviously a huge injury to Aaron Rodgers. That derails the season. Cincinnati, 3 points worse than where they started. Joe Burrow been dealing with injuries. So those two are kind of on the side. Then you have this cluster of teams: New England, Denver, the Giants, Washington, Carolina, and Chicago. Those have all been really bad teams. They've really shown no signs of life the last couple of weeks outside of Chicago, all trending in the wrong direction. When I look at this list from the sort of teams that have gained, the ones that have improved, I would say San Francisco, most notably, probably the highest overpriced at the moment. When I look at these teams, New England, Denver, New York, Washington, Carolina, Chicago, all of these teams that have dropped off, tough to really point at one and say, like, long-term, these are teams that I could see turning it around. I think we're looking at this group of teams that are all struggling, and there's really clear signs why. The Pats offense has a ton of issues. Denver, that defense is historically bad and got actually quite lucky last week not to give up more than 31 to the Jets. You have Washington that's now in a spot where their secondary is way less than what we expected them to be coming into the season. Offense has been rocky week to week. Carolina just can't do anything offensively, and now you have the head coach, Frank Reich, with just a bizarre presser yesterday. In Chicago, I mean, we all know about the Bears. But if I am going to look at this list and say, well, there's potential for some value, I'm going to look at New England. And again, we'll talk about that game as we get going. So with all that said, let's get into the previews for the week. But curious, guys, of these teams that I just outlined, San Francisco, Miami, Detroit, which one of those three would you say is the most overrated, just based on that price? San Francisco, Miami, Detroit. And then of those teams that I listed that have fell off, who would you say maybe still has some life? New England, Washington, or Chicago? Let's highlight those three. Let me know in the comments in the live chat on the right if you have any thoughts on those teams and how they look overall. If any of those maybe a little bit too high or maybe a little bit under. Pulling up the odds board now as we'll go through game by game. You're going to hear the classic Spank Odds slap and noise for the intro music as there we go. Didn't have it up live before we went live, and so have it up now. We've got the board. Has anyone had that happen to them as they're sitting in the room with family, or maybe the wife's around and you get that? One of the more awkward things to explain in sports betting in 2023, but nevertheless, we've got the odds board up now. So let's go game by game. First and foremost, it is the Broncos Chiefs kicking things off tomorrow night. Thursday night football, 10.5 is the point spread for the Chiefs across the board. Total is down this morning to 47. Big thing stands out, and that's obviously the wind. When you're looking at the forecast right now, 22 miles per hour. It's going to be rain. Looks like heavy rain as well within the forecast. You've probably heard me say this 100 times if you listen to the podcast or elsewhere. Wind above 20 miles per hour is when totals really fall off in the NFL. 20 miles per hour or more the last 10 years within the NFL averages 37 points scored per game and a closing total of 38 points. And so you can look at this total, which was at 51.5. You get the wind, you get the rain, you get above the threshold for the forecast. It's pretty easy to understand why we're down almost 5 points from the opener. When you see a total this high, it's never going to get down to that number in the high 30s. That just doesn't happen. But you can see why this number's moved down so much. You also have the Chiefs defense, which has been fantastic so far through 5 weeks. And they're matching up with the Broncos offense that it's tough to make heads or tails of at the moment. There's a lot of stats per drive, touchdown rate, series conversion rate, which look really good for Denver. But I just don't know what that's going to look like again against a pretty good Chiefs defense here. That's going to be tough. Brian says, how are the Broncos going to score 17? I mean, it's just so hard to tell week to week. And you watch the Peyton press conferences, and he's pulling out names like Jaleel McLaughlin. He's looking at Marvin Mims, who's still just grossly underutilized. There's just very little talk about Sutton. There's very little talk about Judy. There's very little, I don't know. He's looking for something, and it's just not clicking all the way around, despite kind of these good underlying metrics. So I'm really torn on the Broncos overall. A tough game from the side perspective, and that wind and rain potential just really makes this tough all the way around to look at the total, especially now that it has moved down. And so it's a Thursday night game that, too, from a prop perspective, becomes really difficult. For the Chiefs specifically, they have more skill position players offered in the prop market than any other team. And it's not particularly close. You have, obviously, Mahomes. He gets priced for passing and rushing. You have multiple running backs priced for rushing. And then last week, they had 10 different skill position guys priced for receiving yards. Outside of Kelsey, 9 of the 10 were between 15.5 and 32.5 yards. And so you have this massive spread on the roster between all of these skill guys that are kind of all priced within the same window. And it's really hard to find specific usage or accurate quotes from Reed in this offense about who's going to get the boost. Rashee Rice was kind of the guy that got bumped during the Jets game. He got up to 32.5. He made a couple good catches late in those key drives, and then he comes back and he had, I think, 8 or 9 routes last week. Like, it was just a huge drop-off. And so it's so specific week to week. The Chiefs are just a really hard time to bet within the props. John asked, how do you see the Denver running back split playing out with Javonte seemingly returning this week? Again, it's a mess, right? Very similar to Kansas City. Is it going to be Pacheco? Is it going to be McKinnon? Is Edwards-Helaire going to sneak in and get a few carries? Denver really, like, it started off with Williams is going to get everything. And then all of a sudden you had the Pirine breakout game early in the season. And then it turned into Peyton wanting to get McLaughlin more touches, more carries, and he's kind of forced touchdowns to him the last couple weeks. Just two teams that are brutally difficult to find a lot of value with in terms of props because it's just so game and usage specific. Marvin Mims was a guy on the RAS app I pointed out the last couple of weeks, but he's essentially like a yes-no prop guy because if he makes a catch, it's deep downfield, it's 25 yards plus, it's an explosive play. If he doesn't, he gets a 0 for the week, and he's getting like 10 routes a week. It's pretty crazy despite how often he's mentioned as a guy that the Broncos need to get played into more. And so, yeah, it's a tough game all around, but certainly that wind is going to play a factor overall. Devin mentions the spank odd comment. Yeah, it's awkward, right? Even the wife knows what it is, but that first time that I had the speakers on and pulled it up, it is very real. And Rudy and Brian Rhodes seem to share in the pain as well. Interesting comments on the trending up and down. Ron says Chicago will be trending up. Jay Nava says Chicago is alive. Last couple games, giving some people a little bit of interest. Jay Nava also said Miami overrated. Garrett, on the other hand, Chicago has some life. Seems like the Bears are the consensus of those teams that are down that are going to be alive. But Brian Rhodes came out with Washington still alive. Certainly interested in that regard as well. Broncos took a nosedive. Yeah, they certainly did. And that game could have been a lot worse all the way around for the Broncos defense if the Jets were able to do anything within the red zone. Zach Moss, how much lower will the point spread drop if the total continues to go down? This is a really good question. As totals come down, obviously the points on the side become more valuable. Right now, it's still high enough that you're probably not going to see that much of an impact. I don't know if this total, even if the wind continues to tick up, gets much lower. I think it maybe 46.5 is the floor, 47, pretty important number within totals. And so that's probably the cap. If this does come back the other way, I think 10's probably the floor here for the price. Let's get into the Sunday games. Probably my favorite game from just a handicapping perspective is the Ravens-Titans London game. Right now, Baltimore is a 4-point favorite. Total in this game is 41. Yesterday, one of those mystery services that everyone was asking about had a release on Baltimore. I believe they took 3.5, and that's why we're back to 4. A couple things I'll say here about the Ravens. The practice report today had Moses and Stanley full participants. So it's going to be the first time since week 1 to start that we have seen the Ravens with a full offensive line. If you've tuned into the preview the last couple of weeks, It's been me commenting on the Ravens offense being stuck between what they want to be and what they were a year ago, mainly driven by injuries, right? The offensive line was banged up. Monken couldn't really get his offense going the way he wants it to. Lamar Jackson, after 38 pass attempts last week, which was a season high, came out and said, this is the identity that we want. We want these explosive plays. The offense is trending in the right direction, right? He kind of reaffirmed that, like, he wants to pass more. He said it all offseason. He finally got to do it because he had a lot of time. It was just a bizarre rivalry game against the Steelers in every way. And so you kind of take a step back. You look at this week. Okay, here's the fresh week. Offensive line guys are full participants in practice. Lamar's coming out. They have the passing motivation behind switching this offense. We might finally see it this week to a full extent. You think about the matchup. The Titans, very much a pass funnel defense, have allowed some huge games to opposing quarterbacks, especially conceding those explosive plays, right? You can all kind of see it start to align. Where I kind of get over the top with the Ravens here and really sort of look at that as potential to come true, there was a report, a long article by Jeff Zrebiec, who covers the Ravens, probably butchered the last name. He went into just incredible lengths to describe the emphasis that John Harbaugh has put on this London game, because the last time he went over, they lost to Jacksonville by 40 points. And it was basically Harbaugh saying, it's not happening again. We're circling this game. We're going out of our way. And dating back to the early summer, you're going back to May and June, Harbaugh put staff in place for this week specifically. The Ravens flew over to London on Sunday night, something I've never seen an NFL team do, going to the London game. The Ravens have fully moved their operation over. And it's this article, like, it went down to like Wi-Fi connections in hotel rooms, like the level of detail that this trip has gone into for the Ravens, with the emphasis of not getting blown out and embarrassed again from Harbaugh, is pretty intense. And so I found that really interesting. The Titans fly out tomorrow night on Thursday. It won't be a Friday departure like the Bills did. But you kind of have to look at the prep that the Ravens have put into this and think it's pretty interesting. So a lot coming together for the Ravens. I think it's a big passing game all the way around for Baltimore. We like the over in this one. I like the over as well. Even still at the current number, I like the side as well a little bit for the Ravens too. Let's move on to Commanders on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. This is a really easy handicap when you're looking at this point spread. 2.5 for Atlanta, 42.5 is the total. The big question is, will Arthur Smith let Desmond Ridder throw? Last week, Ridder had the best performance of his career. He now faces a Washington Commanders defense that has allowed at least 30 points in the last 4 weeks, give up a ton to opposing wide receivers, right? When you want to attack the Commanders, you pass and throw downfield. Despite that performance that Ridder put on last week, Atlanta finished the week 10.5% below expectation for pass rate. So even as the pass was working and all of the situations pointed towards the Falcons passing more to have more success, they still didn't let Ridder throw that often, which makes sense, right? He's been struggling this season, but there was at least a sign of life, right? And still, Smith was kind of putting the governor on this offense all the way around. And so you look at the season as a whole, the Falcons have the third lowest pass rate over expectation. Atlanta does not build leads. They do not get out to fast starts. They're very tight and condensed offensively. And so if you're looking at this, you're saying like, okay, all of this receiving talent, there's big names, but is Smith going to be able to, one, take advantage of it, and two, put Ridder in a position to take advantage of it? Tough, right? And so that's really the full extent of this handicap all the way around. Commanders have extra time to prepare. I got a Twitter DM that brought up an angle, and I don't know the truth to this, and I don't know the extent of it. So this is completely unverified. You guys in the chat can go through and say this. He said Atlanta was about to hire Bieniemy a couple years ago when they did the Smith hire, and they cut him at the last minute, and there was like negative fallout from that. And so he was looking at this as a potential spot where Bieniemy goes back into Atlanta with a point to prove. Again, I don't know the truth to that. I don't know the extent of it. Interesting storyline and headline all the way over around. If that's true, it's something I guess you can think about as maybe motivation for the Washington offense. But there's a spot here where, like, you look at the Falcons defense, it's been really solid all season long. So that's something to think about overall. Brian Rhodes says that's why the Falcons made that huge trade for Van Jefferson, right? Anyone who looks at Kyle Pitts week to week was probably not upset about that. But Pitts finally has a big game, and then Atlanta goes receiver shopping. So that's Arthur Smith confuses me. There's no question about it all the way around. Devin says, what about Kirk to the Falcons? Send Kirk to the Jets, Devin. Don't send him to the Falcons. Come on. We have a question here, Bob, for like the third time. Is this live? Yes, it is live, Bob. We are fully live. Would you start Chase or Hopkins at PPR? I have no idea what PPR means. Not the guy to ask for that one specifically. From prop prices, I haven't seen a number for each of them just yet. I did see that the London game was up at a couple different spots. Let's keep going. Vikings on the road at the Chicago Bears. 2.5, the current number for Minnesota. Total in this game, 44.5, down from 48.5. Jefferson out on IR. There's now rumors that he could potentially miss the season as fallout from some of that, from team guys sort of equating this same situation to Cooper Kupp from a year ago and potentially having him shut down. I don't know if I'm fully buying into that, but now the Kirk Cousins trade stuff seems very real before the deadline at the end of the month. And so that's something to watch as Minnesota kind of goes through this transition period. Boy, everyone just talked about in the chat, right? Chicago's this upstart team. They're one of the teams that has dropped off the most, but still has the most life. What I've noticed from the Vikings defense is, I think, quite notable the last couple of weeks. Flores started the season first 3 weeks, 63% blitz rate, had his corners in the soft zone coverage. I don't know if someone internally got to him and was like, we got to switch this, because the last 2 weeks, it's been the complete opposite scenario. And the Vikings defense has actually played relatively well the last 2 weeks after just getting blown up the first 3 weeks because of how aggressive they were up front and how soft they were behind. It just made stuff so easy for opposing offenses. And all of a sudden, it's looked not bad the last 2 weeks. And it wasn't a QB specific thing, because you had Young and Mahomes. You don't blitz Mahomes. Everyone knows that. But people have got away blitzing Young and having a lot of success with it. And so I think there's been kind of like a mandate change within the Vikings defense as a whole, which is making me think about them a lot differently. When I look at 44.5, even without Jefferson, my first instinct was like, this is an easy over, just with how the Bears are playing and how the Vikings are playing. But you kind of start to strip it away. You have this defensive change that's kind of quietly happening for Minnesota that makes them much less of an over. You take Jefferson out of the equation. With all the turnovers they've had, it may kind of encourage a little bit more of a ground game, as much as O'Connell hates it. But we've seen Akers' touches increase. We start to see them use the run a little bit more just to prevent those turnovers. You have the Bears guys coming back within the secondary. They're going to get 2 starters back very likely this week. And so that's kind of building up a little bit here. From a prop perspective, there's now a big split within this, because if you look at, say, like the Roto World, I guess it's NBC now. I don't know specifically what it is. But like all these alert services. Yesterday, there was an article in The Athletic, and there was a sentence within it that suggested, and it was completely speculative, that KJ Osborne would be the guy that would step into the X role and become the lead receiver for Minnesota. But it wasn't attached to a coach saying it. There was nothing firm on it. It was just a reporter that said, we think that Osborne's going to take over. And so all these alert sites followed up on that. They took that one sentence from the article and just blasted it out. And so the Twitter timeline was Osborne to see uptick in carries, Osborne to get all the receptions, Osborne to take the Jefferson role, right? It might happen. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but just objectively, if you're watching this Vikings team, exactly what Garrett said, do you automatically look at Addison props? Addison has been the better receiver on field so far through 5 weeks. Kevin O'Connell is a very smart guy. I don't know if I fully agree with that Osborne sentiment that he's just going to take over. And so I thought that was a good reflection of kind of the prop market, and probably to some extent the fantasy market. That's not my area. I don't know. But there's so many alert services, Underdog, the Roto World stuff, all of these news sites that are just retweeting kind of headlines that come from places. And it's kind of like the telephone game now to an extent, where the first person says one thing, it goes to the next one, they try to say the same thing. But by the time you're to like the 8th or 10th retweet, things are getting taken so out of context. And that was interesting if you trace it back to where it's not even like a direct quote. It's just a speculative source that was looking at it. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I'm very curious to see what number we get for Osborne, what number we get for Addison, and to an extent, what number we get for Hawkinson as well. So that's certainly something to think about from the prop side. But I think these 2.5s get bet for Minnesota. I do think we see this go back to 3, just because you're looking at how far the Bears have dropped off, and now you're really expecting a pretty big bounce back here from them, even with it being a home game. But that's certainly something to watch out for. Seattle, Cincinnati. Hands up on this one, guys. Second week in a row. Last week, I was struggling to get through the preview and not sort of be drooling over Cincinnati. I couldn't believe how low that number got. And here we are again. 2.5 is the price for the Bengals. We talked about them being the biggest drop-off. They're 3 points less within some of these aggregate ratings from where they started week 1. They're now facing a Seahawks team that, when you look at it, right, put the spot aside, the cross-country stuff, we'll just put that over here, right? When we think about what the Seahawks have done so far, they lose to the Rams week 1, completely shut down in the second half. They get the win in Detroit. Lions had that big win against Kansas City week 1. Seahawks, I think that game went to OT, 37-31. They get the win against Detroit. But then you see Seattle just slowly kind of creeping up these rankings, right? They beat a winless Carolina team who everyone's just destroying. And then they beat a Giants team who's very likely not to be winless, that everybody is just beating up on as well. And so I look at this now, and on one hand, you can say, like, okay, the Bengals are in the same class as those teams that the Seahawks have beat up on. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think Cincinnati right now, as it stands, might be the most underrated team in the NFL. The safeties and lack of support there with everything they lost in the offseason worries me. Potentially not having Chidobe Awuzie worries me, right? Those are big injuries. But I think offensively, we've seen the absolute rock bottom floor for what Cincinnati could be all the way around. And what confuses me a bit is, we know Joe Burrow is not 100%, right? But how much more do we need to see to be comfortable betting on him? Last week against Arizona, he practiced all week, which for any other quarterback in the league, be like, okay, he's back to full health. This is good. We're going to bet on him. We watch him against Arizona. He's out of the pocket. He's scrambling. He's jumping over defenders. Like, what more do we need from this, right? And if there was not this kind of underlying sentiment to he's still not 100% and he's still hurt and the calf is an issue, this number is going to be way higher than 2.5. There's no question about it. And so I get that Higgins has not practiced, right? But how did that offense look without Higgins last week? I mean, it wasn't an issue at all. And so, like, I don't know. It's just something we're looking at with the Bengals and just trying to find reasons pulling away. I don't know. This is another week where I'm like, how do you not look to the Bengals in this spot at 2.5 still? Do you look to the over in this spot? Yeah. It's been bet up a little bit. It's now at 45, which is probably fair. But yes, I definitely agree with that sentiment. Brian Rhodes says 5-1 to win their division. I've been honestly, division, conference, I mean, it's all out there for Cincinnati for sure. A lot cheaper than what we were looking at the start of the season overall. So that's my sort of sentiment there. 49ers, Browns. Jordan, we'll get to the Saints in a second. 49ers, Browns. 6.5 now for San Francisco. Open 3.5. Has been bet up. Also adjusted up. Yesterday, weird report. So the Browns felt it was necessary before a practice day on Wednesday to come out on a Tuesday and say, we're not going to start DTR at quarterback. If we need a backup, it's going to be PJ Walker. If Deshaun Watson was actually in line to start and there wasn't serious worry about him not starting, why in the world are the Browns coming out on a Tuesday, a non-practice day, to announce that PJ Walker, of all guys, is going to be in line to start? Like, I don't know why there was this need to deny DTR potentially starting again. So hearing that on a Tuesday out of the bye nonetheless, which was weird too, makes me think that there's real doubts that Watson could be under center. If Watson does not play, this line is going above 7, potentially higher. If Watson does play, I think you're looking at a spot where this number creeps back a little bit, and the Browns are probably going to be a side that's very appealing to a lot of professionals. You have the 49ers, as we mentioned, adjusted up higher than any other team week 1 to where we are now within the market. We also have that within these aggregate power rankings, right? The 49ers are peak. Yes, they've been performing really, really well. They've played the easiest strength of schedule of any team aside from the New Orleans Saints through 5 weeks. They've played very well. That score differential has been fantastic. But now it's a road game to Cleveland against a very good defense and a Browns team that really excels at running the football, where I think the Niners are sneaky vulnerable over the course of the season. You also have a Browns front that can absolutely get pressure and really test Purdy. Cowboys, brutal game plan all the way around, got behind, never got the opportunity to do anything with their defensive line. I think if the Browns can keep it competitive early, they can really have an impact with their defense and keep this closer. If Watson is not out there and you're forced to look at PJ Walker against this Niners defense, want no part of it. Maybe the price gets high enough where you're interested. Maybe you see like an 8 and you're like, okay, you got to do it. That's being really, 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 really hopeful. But boy, you start to look at this and you really want to take the Browns in this spot at home, but with PJ Walker, I just don't think you can get to it. Obviously streaming, so don't have the tweets. Rappaport just tweeted Watson not practicing. Yeah, you look at this and you're like, how can that Tuesday announcement just to me was a huge tell that he's probably not going to be there. And so I think this number goes up with PJ Walker. And I think there's a point where you have to be interested in the Browns going the other way. But with PJ Walker, I just don't think that you could possibly pull the trigger. Let's keep going. Saints, Texans. Here we go. Who just asked the Saints question? Nevertheless, here we are. Saints have played the easiest strength of schedule of any team through 5 weeks. When you look at the teams that the Saints have beat and how they have done it, I just don't think very highly of this team overall. They sneak by the Titans by 1 point. They hang on against the Panthers to win by 3 points. They blow a 3-score lead, to the Packers. They did nothing and completely no-showed against Tampa Bay. And then they win 34-0 against New England. Impressive win going into Foxborough and getting it. I get that. But you start to think about all of this all the way around, right? Like, they've just played nobody. And it hasn't been the same situation as the 49ers where it's big wins, it's big victories, it's blowouts, it's dominance, right? It's just squeaking by bad opponents. Now they have another bad opponent in Houston this week, but they go to now laying points on the road. I just didn't fully agree with that. And Houston certainly been playing hard the last couple of weeks. Ryans has this team in a pretty good spot. Tank Dell is in the concussion protocol. That certainly shifts around Texans props quite a bit. No player who's entered the protocol has been able to play the next week. So I think you look at Dell as very, very likely to miss this game. That opens things up pretty wide regardless here. But certainly like the Texans earlier in the week of this, just thought that the Saints had been adjusted up too far. A couple questions here, Devin. Exactly. Played no one, looked good doing so. That's exactly kind of the sentiment overall. Connor says, back to Bengals, supposed to be very windy Sunday in Cincinnati. An arm strength is not a strength of Burrow's. Good point on the weather. You have all of these East Coast games, wind, rain, all in the forecast, going to be impacted by weather a lot. Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, all of these are going to be weather spots to look at. And so you think about that Niners-Browns game with a bigger number. That gets interesting too. Someone said 10 for PJ Walker. I don't think we get to 10, certainly, especially not with the total this low. There would be bets coming back the other way before that. If you give me a 10, sign me up for Cleveland. If it happens to get that high, I don't think that it does get there overall. So yeah, I think Texans pretty interesting in that spot. Maybe less or so now that this number's come in, but Saints certainly getting a ton of respect for who they've played so far. Colts on the road at the Jags. So you now have Gardner Minshew coming in as the starter. Sounds like Anthony Richardson at risk for missing the rest of the season. He is on IR, will miss at least the next 4 weeks. But when Steichen was asked this morning, does he expect him to return? He was not overly confident that that would be the case. And so looks like a big offensive shift now for the Colts. I know there's people in the comments that are going to say Gardner Minshew is the better quarterback, and they're going to comment it. Here's what I would say, and just give you a chance to pause. Minshew has come in relief twice, and it was sort of a mid-game shift to where Richardson was injured. Last week was mid-game. First time was like late first quarter, early second quarter. Minshew looks good. From a prep standpoint for a defense, this is pretty extreme when defending the Colts, right? Because you see Richardson, this massive quarterback in the pocket, very mobile, big arm, deep downfield passer. To go to Minshew, small guy in the pocket, not much of a threat to run, gets the ball out very quickly. It couldn't be more contrasting styles. And so I think Minshew has benefited a lot from these two games coming in relief against softer defenses where he's looked a lot better than what he actually is. In the one start that he had where a team had full week to prep, he looked horrible going into Baltimore. And so I'm surprised to see the Colts number come down. This was 5.5. We're now down to a flat 4. Pinnacle's soft 4. I don't fully buy into that. I think the Colts are a worse team slightly with Minshew under center than they are with Richardson. You heard last week, Richardson leading the league in explosive plays, did a lot for Indianapolis, certainly made them a very interesting team if they fall behind, was kind of making the Colts a big over team. And they just had a ton of bad luck in the red zone. I don't think Minshew, like he was last week against the Titans, is an 11 yards per pass type of guy. I just don't think that it's the case. I think he's much shorter. And so I don't agree with this number coming down. I think the Jags coming back from London for 2 weeks are in a bit of an interesting spot here. They were a yard per play better in the opener where they won by 10 points against the Colts. And now they get the game at home. They get a Colts defense that's allowed some big games to opposing wide receivers. Ridley had a huge game to start. And really what surprised me is the Jags defense, quietly a top 12 unit, was anticipating preseason it would be much worse than that. They have really stepped up and performed really well against some good quarterbacks too. Had a very good game against Mahomes, had a very good game against Allen, all things considering. And a lot of the Jags offensive struggles have been just bad third down luck, bad fourth down luck. They had a ton of untimely drops that were really costly. I know there's the second game revenge thing within the division, but I got to look to the Jags here at -4 if you're putting me on the spot within this. And so that certainly stands out. Allen says certainly can't be a good spot for the Jags coming home after 2 weeks in London and winning 2 big games. I get that. What I don't know fully is how much this is already priced in. How good is the market got at pricing in London spots? How good is it at pricing in something that has never happened before? We've never seen a team go through this situation. And so I think there's an argument that you can say that it's adjusted and priced in. I don't know. Maybe that's why it's come down and people don't buy into that. But I certainly find the Jags pretty intriguing here. And I just don't think the Colts are any better if that was part of the reason why this has been adjusted down. Panthers, Dolphins, don't need to spend much time here. I think 2 things stand out as we're looking at the Dolphins, a 13.5 point favorite with a total of 48.5. You had the Frank Reich press conference yesterday where he was implying ownership was sort of meddling within things. Look, Frank Reich needs to step out of play calling, 100%. Been saying it every week. Give the play calling duties to Thomas Brown. My hope is that this is another clunker of an offensive performance. Play calling duties during the bye the next 2 weeks get given over to Thomas Brown. The Panthers come out after the bye, get 3 very winnable games against opponents that are within their weight class, and Thomas Brown puts on a play calling clinic. The Panthers look a lot better, and this team that's a dead under and a dead fade at the moment becomes really appealing to back on and scores a lot more points than they have in the last couple of weeks. I think that's a very real possibility, and I hope that it happens because I would certainly be looking to bet on it. And so let's see what happens this game. I think it's a brutal spot for the Panthers again. I think the number's really big. What I will say for the Dolphins, Devon Achane is now on IR. That's a massive loss for his explosiveness that he has brought to the run game. The Dolphins' pass rate last year was 6th highest in the NFL. Mike McDaniel wants to run the football as much as he can because it sets up everything he wants to do in the pass game. He is very much utilizing pre-snap motion and all of these looks to get guys wide open in space, make things very easy, set up those quick, short throws. Now that you take Achane out of the equation, you have a situation where it's going to be a Mostert and Wilson split with Wilson coming back off of IR. I think that the Dolphins' pass rate, which was 7th last year, 21st this year, is actually going to increase now going forward with Mostert, Wilson in the backfield. I don't think that they're going to stay at that high run rate. And what I think that's going to do is lead to more early game passing, and that's going to skew props a little bit, especially in this game where there's going to be very little resistance from the Panthers defense against this Dolphins offense. And so that's what I would kind of look at and think about when you're looking at the prop perspective from this one. And there's very well potentially a spot where, again, I brought this up at the start. These props are going to be included with the 3-play option at 35 per. And this is certainly a game where I think there's definitely going to be some really good prop looks. And so if you're interested in those that would come officially from the service for that 35, you'll get 3 sides and totals, but any props will be free. So there's a link in the description of this video where you can jump over. Those will be updated as the week goes on. But this is a very, very interesting prop game for both teams that I don't think that the market is going to get right. Lions Buccaneers. Hold on before we get to it. Paul Henzo's great. You guys follow the chat. He has the most ridiculous revenge game angles of anybody that I have ever seen. And the fact that you're able to pull these out as quickly as we go through these really cracks me up. Where was the other one? Minshew and Jim Bob Cooter revenge game. Oh, these make me laugh all the way around. So that's a funny one in there as well. Lots of sentiment here. Jags played the best game last week and people aren't buying it. They will buy Indy like week 1. Makes no sense. We talked about the bad spot. Indy versus Jags games. Give me Pitt versus Baltimore games. Take the dog over field goal. Interesting. Brian says 0-2 at home, last home before the bye. Don't think the Jags go 0-3 at home. Interesting look all the way around. Yeah, good comments on there as well. Certainly something to think about. That second divisional game, always interesting. It certainly skews under historically for sure as well. Lions Bucks. I talked about it on the podcast. How do you not look at this and just really want to bet the Lions? But you look at it and just everything, every sort of fiber of being within your body says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Boy, this number certainly to me stood out as being short. It really is fair when you look at it and you break everything down to look at how the teams have got there. It's a fair number, but just visually to me, it doesn't look right. I feel like the Lions should be a little bit higher. Won't be able to do it, side or total. But yeah, Devin is right. Way too easy. Goff outdoor. Yeah, that's a very good point as well. Certainly those splits, really, really interesting. His home away splits are just insane. You put him outdoors, it's even crazier. So there's a very real angle to that. The one thing that I can say of note within this game, just aside from like internal feelings and speculation, is the Buccaneers' willingness to run on first and second down. It's not changing. And coming out of the bye, it's not going to change too. It is one of the craziest offensive coordinator stances that I have seen in a long time, with Dave Canales clinging, like, and reaffirming it too. He's like, I know it's not working. We're going to keep on doing it. And so if you're trying to bet the Bucs as a dog here, the hard part for me to get there mentally is you're betting it knowing that a lot of the first downs that you're going to get on offense are wasted. And when you look at the Bucs right now, very similar to the Packers, it's a really high EPA per play on offense and a really low success rate. That is 100% driven by Dave Canales and how he's calling plays on first and second down and running it. He's essentially wasting downs, right? He's throwing away first down. He's most of the time throwing away second down with these runs. And what it's leading to is Mayfield having to make big plays downfield. And so you have these numbers for Tampa Bay really skewed, because you can say like, okay, they look good, but they're coming in just really non-opportune situations as a whole. Baker is balling on third down. That's what it is. And so like, how long is that going to continue for? Like, it's just, I've never seen an OC just clinging to this. And that's exactly what we're looking at all the way around. So, yeah, there you go. And that's how it stands. Tough one all the way around. Pats, Raiders. Interesting spot. I'll give Paul Enzo a second to get through to this because I actually don't think it's a revenge game. I think the Belichick versus old peers or staff members is real. I think there's too long of a history to show that it isn't. And when you think about a game planning perspective, that certainly stands out. We mentioned at the start of the show when we were looking at teams that jumped up and jumped down, the Pats are the second most significant drop-off from week 1 to now in terms of their ratings within the market power ratings, in terms of their pricing. The only team that has dropped off more is the New York Giants. I look at this and I think, first of all, about who New England has played so far, right? If we pull up the Patriots' schedule so far through the season, they have played a very good offense in the Philadelphia Eagles. They played a very good offense in the Miami Dolphins. They played a very good offense in the Dallas Cowboys. They were able to beat up on the Jets, the teams that they know very well, with a bad quarterback, and then they just get blown out by the Saints in a performance last week that the Sumer Sports box score had as a 0 percentile historic NFL performance. Kevin Cole, in his review, had the Patriots' offensive performance last week the worst on an EPA per play basis that any team in the NFL has had for the last 2 years. It's all bad, right? When I look at this line has bumped up for the Raiders. It was around the pick'em. We're now out to Raiders 3 minus 20. When you're asking Alan, what is driving all this Raiders money? You're waking up to it 3.5. Right. That's exactly it. It's just this adjustment that's gone in favor of the Raiders that's been anti-Patriots sentiment. We got kind of delayed open because of the Monday night game. I think that this has gone too far. And when I think about what the Patriots can't do on offense, it's throw the football downfield to find receivers in space. When I think about how the Raiders defend every single game, it's preventing receivers getting downfield and finding space. So what the Raiders' strength is on defense is what the Patriots can't and don't want to do. And so we saw against the Steelers an offense that looked horrendous for 3 weeks, then go into Las Vegas and play the Raiders. And all of a sudden, they find success on offense. Why? Because Patrick Graham does not change his defense on a week-to-week basis. So we're going to watch a game on Sunday afternoon where the Raiders sit in soft coverage like they always do. They're going to concede the run. We saw A.J. Dillon look really good on Monday night. He couldn't do anything the last couple of weeks against these teams like Detroit and Atlanta and New Orleans that sit and load the box, play with heavy personnel, play press man coverage at the line. Well, all of a sudden, A.J. Dillon looks really, really good. So it's probably a spot where the Pats, for the first time all season, are going to have success from both of their running backs. We're probably going to see tight ends have success as well in the short passing game. And all of a sudden, you're looking at this and you're like, okay, well, the Pats are going to probably look decent on offense, which is a weird thing to say, but that's just because of how the Raiders play defense. And so this is real. What's about the angle of Max sucking and never covering versus top teams and doing reasonable against non-top teams? It's just like a defensive scheme thing that makes it look a lot better. I think this has gone too far. And so I'm actually interested in the Patriots this week. And that's really the long and short of it. I just think the Raiders are not going to change defensively. I don't think they have the personnel to do so. And I don't think that we are going to look at a spot where Graham is willing to do so, because he just did it against the Packers and it worked. And he's done it a couple other times and had relative success too. And so I don't think that there's this like driving urgency like maybe Flores had, where what he was doing wasn't working. I think Graham is kind of getting weird affirmation that what he is doing is working. That could lead to it all the way around. And so, yeah, that would be what I would point out. I think the Pats are certainly interesting there. Here's Paul Enzo. Josh McDaniels, Jacoby Myers, Brandon Bolden, Jimmy G, Brian Hoyer, Trent Brown, Mick Lombardi, revenge game. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Cardinals, Rams. Fun one here too. On the podcast, it sounded like you had interest in Arizona this week. What do we think peak for that line is? Rams have been bumped up a lot. Cardinals have been bumped down significantly. I think Arizona is playing much better than we anticipated them to. I start to have real concerns about this defense. I think the Cardinals are a dead over team, and I think the Rams are a dead over team as well. For the Cardinals specifically, this is not a typical Jonathan Gannon defense. It's just super aggressive. They're overplaying. They're over pursuing. It's just allowing offenses to find some big plays and explosive plays. The Rams are going to be able to move the football downfield without much resistance because this pass rush is just not going to give the Rams offensive line and Stafford that much trouble. And these receivers with cutback are just going to be able to find space, make those quick catches, pick up big plays. I think the Rams just move it consistently. What interests me a little bit within this is last week, the total for the Rams against the Eagles, they just had the doors bet off of it, went from 46, closed 50.5. The Eagles have this ability when they're in the lead to sit on the ball and deflate games like no other team in the NFL. And they certainly did that against the Rams with a couple 8 to 9 minute drives. The Cardinals are not a team that are ever going to do that with the personnel they have. And they're certainly not going to be able to do it without James Conner. If Arizona is going to score, which I think they will against the Rams defense that is just criminally overrated at the moment, it's going to be with big chunk explosive plays through the pass game. There's not going to be those long drives. And the Rams are going to be able to take what they're given and move down the field consistently. I think the Cardinals are more of an over team and a better potential over partner for the Rams than the Eagles were a week ago. And we are looking at this game about 2 full points, maybe even 3, depending where you're looking, less than what it was a week ago. And I know that it's already been bet up. That over early in the week was terrific. But I wonder if this still has a little bit of room to go on top of this. I think both offenses have pretty big games all the way around. For Arizona, Marquise Brown's usage has been through the roof. He looks like a legitimate number one, probably gets more targets without James Conner in the backfield, which will push Arizona to pass more, especially trailing in this spot. For the Rams, Kupp last week, I think close 60.5. Top of my head, that's certainly going to be higher this week, that he looks close to 100%. Tutu Atwell wasn't even listed for props. He was kind of the odd man out for books, who had basically, he had Higbee the same, they had Nakua the same, they had Kupp at 60, and just Atwell got cut off. And so Rams numbers as a whole, offense, pretty high, like prop-wise, just because you now have like an extra, you have the number one back, right? And nobody else really got adjusted. And so I don't think just deleting Atwell from the prop market and keeping everyone at the same price is necessarily viable, especially if Kupp gets put into like a 78, 80 range this week, which I don't think is out of the question because he was like a 95 to 100 guy last season when he was healthy. So, yeah, let's see what those props look like. But I think both teams have a lot of success moving the football. Eagles, Jets. Finally, the Eagles get bet. Pardon me, last probably about 5 games ago, there was someone that threw out an Eagles comment. I lost it within the chat. First week in a long time, the Eagles have been bet. We've seen money come against them. Last week, it went against them. The Bucs game, it went against them. Nobody wanted to bet on the Eagles. My stance on Philly is they've really not had a crisp offensive game, and they just keep putting up big numbers and they keep covering. And so the Jets defense really underperforming. They're around 20th. I get that the schedule has not been easy for New York. They face some great quarterbacks. Here they face another great quarterback and another great offense too. This is probably the biggest test for the defensive line going against this Eagles offensive line. My one point of hesitance here with the Eagles is, again, what I just mentioned. They get the lead and they just sit on it. And I think that gets amplified on the road, especially within the second half. And so when you're looking at them laying 7, feels like a big number at this point. Earlier in the week, a little bit more interesting where it opened, but I just wouldn't be running to back them. So it's kind of a stay away. The under rightfully has been bet down as well. So that certainly stands out too. Good point here. They are going to be scary when they figure out the red zone. There was a really good piece. I didn't have full time to jump into it from the film guys. And it was about how the Eagles red zone offense with the coordinator shift. You think about Shane Steichen last year, super efficient in the red zone with those QB runs with Hurts. Steichen runs quarterbacks more than any other coach in the league when they're in the red zone. That was a huge staple of it. This year so far, it's been really messy and clunky, and they've had some issues there, but really able to move the football down. So that's something I have on my list to look at, but certainly stands out with some of those red zone struggles for them, just opportunities that they have left out there. And so lots of travel for Philly is absolutely right. I can see that too. The Jets are probably going to draw some pro interest at 7 at some point. They have all season, but this is the first week we've seen the Eagles be bet early in the week in quite a long time. Sunday Night Football, Giants Bills. This is 14. There was a service release on Monday. Can point to the hitman on that one specifically. You want names of groups. He sent out the Giants at a bigger number than where we are now. The Bills had some major injuries against the Jags. 2 of them stand out more than others. The first thing that definitely stands out would be Daquan Jones, whose impact as a pass rusher is far bigger than I actually thought that it was. So you take him off of the defensive line now for the season. That's a big blow to a front 7 that's been terrific. You also have, obviously, in the defensive secondary, the loss of Tre'Davious White. You have other guys that are banged up too. And then in the middle, you have Matt Milano, who, from a defensive player perspective, when you look at his on-off splits, are as significant as any other defender has in the entire league. The Bills fall off the map in terms of defending the run when he's not on the field. They fall off the map defending tight ends when he is not on the field. It's a big blow, both of those guys, to this Bills defense that have been banged up a lot. I totally get why the Giants were bet at 14 or higher. And you also kind of factor in that, look, the Giants are the biggest drop-off of any team ratings-wise week 1 to now. It's been significant. They've looked horrible. You have Daniel Jones dealing with the neck issue. There's optimism that he's going to play, though. But you have kind of the last stand here all the way around for the Giants. They lose this one, season's over. Pretty much is as is at the moment, but this is kind of it. You have Brian Daboll going back to Buffalo. There's certainly extra emphasis on him to do something offensively. And you think about the switch and roll here for the Giants against the Bills with all of these defensive injuries, the extra emphasis from Daboll on the offense to do something here, all the arguments that have been going on the sidelines, behind the scenes, and you have this big injury issue on defense, you kind of see a path to where the Giants could cover here. So I certainly get why the Giants have been bet. I certainly get why this number has come down. Makes a lot of sense to see that in the way that it's going. It's a tough one to stomach, but there's just no way that I could ever look at the Bills in this spot laying this big of a number. And certainly money has come back the other way from people that I respect quite a bit. Let's get to Monday Night Football to finish things off. Cowboys, Chargers. The only thing that I have on this one is I have 2 things. First, Austin Eckler is going to be back. He's close to 100%. Said he could have played last week. That's going to change dynamics within the Chargers backfield from props. Just circle that. Always, sometimes these guys coming off of IR tend to get lost a little bit within the shuffle of things. So that's something to think about. 2, I really like the Cowboys. I really like what they could be. I'm just having a hard time figuring out when they're going to be that team on a week-to-week basis. I think if you get a situation where both the offense and defense are clicking, they're arguably the 3rd best team in the NFL. And I think the ceiling could have it higher than that. I wonder if the injury to Diggs and how that has shuffled around the defense as a whole is going to be something that maybe the Cowboys are going to be unable to overcome. We talked 2 weeks ago after that injury about how Cowboys totals, specifically to the over, are going to become very interesting. We saw the Sunday night game against San Francisco fly over as the Niners moved the football up and down the field. We have seen this total from 47.5 now get out to 51. I think the Cowboys are going to turn into just a massive over team. I think offensively, they're going to look a lot better in this spot against the Chargers defense. But I think LA is going to be able to move the football. And so I totally get the move to the over. I'm not running in to get it at 51. The Chargers just played a dead under team in the Raiders that really just take the wind out of games with how they play defense and force teams to go down the field methodically. No real thought at this moment on the side or total, but I certainly agree with the move to the over as a whole. Last order of business. If there's any questions, let me know in the chat on the side. Teasers, where are you looking at for the teaser of the week? Everybody's asking in the chat. As always, every single week, we should just make a teaser-specific segment. Putting me on the spot for a teaser in this one. Tricky week. I'm saying that right now as I look at it. Let's go. I don't know if Houston's fair all the way around to look at a teaser within this spot. Boy, there's not a lot that I like. I'll tease the should have been more prepared for this one. Texans would be the first leg I look at if you can still get it. I don't think that that's a fair one to look at. Tease the Rams down from 7, which is ugly, but I'll take the Rams down from 7, and I will tease the Washington Commanders up just because I don't think that the Falcons can win by a big margin all the way around. So that's what I would do. But I would elect to go with the Texans and the Rams over putting the Commanders in there. But that's what I would look at. Devin says Texans, Cardinals. I don't think I want to take the Cardinals up as they could get blown out. The Pats look nice. I agree with that. That's probably better than what I said, because I don't think the Raiders are going to win by margin, but that's kind of above 3. I wouldn't look to do that with the Pats necessarily, so I wouldn't go against it, but I get where you're going with that. David says Eagles teasers. Yeah, I can see that for sure as well within that one too. Let's see if that gets up a little bit higher as well, but that's where I would stand on that one. Not as easy of a teaser leg as I said. Okay, before we wrap up, just want to remind everybody, raspicks.com/football. We will have props for this week. Very likely, I'll say potentially a prop for Thursday Night Football, as I'm seeing the chat right now. We'll definitely have a couple on Sunday. There's a couple angles that I really like. You can buy the 3 for $35, and what that will lead you to is getting sides and totals as well. So you'll get 3 more sides and totals as they come. Any props between now and that third play going out, you'll get it. And so you'll be sure to get the props for week 6 to go out officially through the service. Would really recommend, if you like the content you're watching, if you like the podcast, give that a try. See if the service is for you. You'll get a couple of really good bets out of it, and you'll just decide if it's something you want to go forward with for the rest of the season and see if it's for you. But that's on raspicks.com/football. Would recommend giving it a try and seeing if it is something that you like going forward. Michael, we will do the look ahead next week. I'll make that a segment as well, as we have those up right now, looking at that one as well. So appreciate everybody stopping by. David says, thank you very much. Bryce, thank you as well for joining. Brian, thank you as very much. There was a really good note too. I just want to pull it up before everybody leaves. I saw it as it came through, but I was kind of on a train of thought looking at a game, but it was a very nice comment. Deuce of Hearts, no specific question, but a big thank you for all you do. Been following your segments and podcasts for a couple of years, and you've helped me tremendously. Please keep up the good work. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching. Appreciate you stopping by each and every morning, as well as joining me here Wednesday. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you to Zach as well. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. We will have the update on Sunday. Don't know if it'll happen this week. We'll get it right, and then we'll do it at the right time. Still a couple things to figure out. But thank you, everybody, for stopping by. Have a fantastic week 6. Hopefully see some of you over on the service for some of those prop releases. And as always, the podcast will be back early in the morning tomorrow and Friday as well to wrap up the week. Have a fantastic Wednesday, everybody. We'll see you on the next show.